Zixathara stepped off the transport ship and felt the artificial gravity pull at their scaled feet. The space station hung in orbit around a blue and green world that the humans called Kepler 442b. Everything here smelled wrong to the Kethmori warrior. Too much oxygen, too much water vapor, and underneath it all, the strange scent of these pink creatures called humans. The docking bay buzzed with activity as soldiers moved equipment and supplies. Zixathara watched the humans work and felt disappointment settle in their chest like a cold stone. These were supposed to be the great warriors that other species whispered about in the dark corners of cantinas across the galaxy. These soft, small beings with their pale skin and tiny teeth looked like they could barely lift their own weapons, let alone use them effectively against the coming threat. A human approached, wearing the uniform markings of a captain. He was average height for his species, with brown hair and green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. "You must be Zixathara," he said, extending his hand in the strange human greeting ritual. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. Welcome to Station Alpha." Zixathara looked at the offered hand, but did not take it. Among the Kethmori, such casual touching was reserved for combat or mating rituals. "I am here because the collective ordered it," Zixathara replied in careful, standard Galactic. "The Void Hunters approach your sector. My people have experience fighting them." Jake Morrison lowered his hand without showing offense. "We're grateful for the help. Let me introduce you to my team." He gestured to 4 other humans standing nearby. "Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, our medic and tactical specialist." A woman with dark hair and kind eyes nodded. "Sergeant Pete Collins, our weapons expert." A tall man with broad shoulders gave a brief salute. "Corporal Lisa Chen, our tech specialist." A smaller woman with quick, intelligent eyes smiled. "And Private Ryan Murphy, our newest addition, but don't let that fool you." A young man with red hair grinned widely. Zixathara studied each human in turn. Amy Rodriguez carried medical supplies alongside combat gear, which seemed inefficient. Pete Collins had scars on his hands that suggested he had been careless with explosives. Lisa Chen's equipment was held together with improvised repairs rather than proper replacements. Ryan Murphy looked barely old enough to have completed basic training among any civilized species. "These are your elite warriors?" Zixathara asked. The humans exchanged glances, and several of them made a sound that Zixathara would later learn was laughter. "Elite might be pushing it," Jake Morrison said, "but they're good people, and they get the job done." Good people. Zixathara had never heard military effectiveness described in terms of moral character. Among the Kethmori, warriors were judged by their kill count, their tactical brilliance, and their ability to survive. Personal virtue was irrelevant on the battlefield. Jake Morrison led the group through the station's corridors. The walls were covered with images that served no tactical purpose, pictures of human families, artwork created by children, messages of encouragement from civilians. "Morale boosters," Jake explained when he noticed Zixathara staring. "Reminds us what we're fighting for." The briefing room was small and cramped by Kethmori standards. Holographic displays showed the approaching Void Hunter fleet, massive black ships that looked like diseased organs floating through space. Zixathara had seen these ships before, during the massacre of the Quellan homeworld. The memory made their scales itch with remembered fear. "Intelligence suggests they'll hit the outer colonies first," Amy Rodriguez was saying, pointing to star charts. "Standard Void Hunter tactics. They'll try to turn the colonists into more of their kind before moving toward the core worlds." "We need to evacuate the civilians," Pete Collins added. "Get them to the inner defensive perimeter." "Negative," Zixathara interrupted. All the humans turned to look at the alien warrior. "Evacuation takes too many resources. Better to use civilians as early warning system." When they die, you know the enemy has arrived. The silence that followed was unlike anything Zixathara had experienced. The humans were not just disagreeing, they were horrified. Ryan Murphy's face had gone pale, and Amy Rodriguez looked like she might be sick. "We don't sacrifice civilians," Jake Morrison said quietly. "Ever. That's not how we do things." "Then how do you expect to win?" Zixathara demanded. "War requires difficult choices. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." "The needs of everyone matter," Lisa Chen said, her voice firm despite her small size. "We find a way to save everyone, or we keep looking until we do." Zixathara felt confusion ripple through their thoughts. This made no tactical sense. These humans seemed more concerned with protecting weakness than eliminating threats. During the rest of the briefing, Zixathara watched them plan elaborate evacuation routes, discuss supplies for refugee camps, and debate the best ways to minimize civilian casualties. They spent more time planning to save lives than planning to take them. When the briefing ended, Zixathara walked to the observation deck and stared out at the stars. The Void Hunters were coming, and the humans wanted to fight them with compassion and hope. It seemed like trying to stop a wildfire with flower petals, but other species feared humans, even respected them. There had to be something Zixathara was missing, some hidden strength that was not obvious on the surface. The Kethmori warrior decided to watch and wait. Perhaps these strange creatures would reveal their secrets in time. After all, the galaxy was full of surprises, and humans were proving to be the strangest surprise of all. 3 weeks passed on Station Alpha, and Zixathara began to notice things about the humans that made no sense according to any military doctrine the Kethmori had ever studied. The alien warrior spent most days observing, trying to understand. These strange creatures who seemed to do everything wrong yet somehow maintained their reputation as formidable opponents. Jake Morrison worked 18 hours each day, but he did not spend that time planning attacks or studying enemy weaknesses. Instead, he sat in his office reading files about every person under his command. Zixathara watched through the window as the captain memorized details that had nothing to do with combat effectiveness. He knew that Amy Rodriguez sent money to her younger brother's medical school. He knew that Pete Collins had nightmares about his first combat deployment. He knew that Lisa Chen's parents had died in a mining accident when she was 12. He knew that Ryan Murphy joined the military to escape poverty on a rim world colony. "Why do you waste time learning these things?" Zixathara asked one evening, finding Jake still reading personnel files. "Their personal lives do not affect their ability to fight." Jake looked up from his datapad. "Everything affects their ability to fight," he said. "If I know what matters to them, I can help them when they need it. If I know their fears, I can help them overcome those fears. If I know their strengths, I can put them in positions where they'll succeed. Among my people, weakness is eliminated," Zixathara replied. "It makes the group stronger." "Among my people, weakness is supported," Jake said. "It makes the group stronger too, just in a different way." Zixathara did not understand, but continued watching. Amy Rodriguez spent her free time in the medical bay, but not treating injuries. Instead, she practiced emergency procedures over and over, timing herself as she worked on training dummies. When Zixathara asked why, Amy explained that in real combat, she might need to treat wounded soldiers while under fire. "I need to be fast enough to save them even when everything is going wrong," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Every second counts when someone is bleeding out." "But you are not a combat medic," Zixathara pointed out. "You are tactical specialist. Treating wounds is secondary duty." Amy stared at the alien warrior with something that might have been pity. "Saving lives is never a secondary duty," she said. "Everything else is just details." Pete Collins behaved even more strangely. The weapons expert spent hours teaching junior soldiers advanced combat techniques, sharing knowledge that took him years to acquire. Among the Kethmori, such information was guarded carefully. Superior warriors did not make their subordinates more skilled, because that could threaten their own position in the hierarchy. You are creating competition for yourself, Zixathara observed during one training session. Why make others as dangerous as you are? Pete paused in demonstrating a disarming technique. Because when the shooting starts, I want the most dangerous people possible standing next to me, he said. I don't care if they're better than me, as long as they can watch my back and I can watch theirs. Lisa Chen was perhaps the strangest of all. The tech specialist worked constantly on equipment modifications, but never for her own gear. She improved other people's weapons, enhanced their armor, and built devices that she would never use herself. Her workbench was covered with projects labeled with other soldiers' names. This targeting system is for Rodriguez, she explained when Zixathara asked about her work. She's been having trouble with long-range shots in low light. This modification should help. She picked up another device. This is a signal booster for Murphy. His communication gear keeps cutting out during exercises, and this is an enhanced scope for Collins, calibrated for his specific vision requirements. What do you gain from this effort? Zixathara asked. Lisa looked confused by the question. I gain teammates who are more likely to survive, she said. What else would I want to gain? Even Ryan Murphy, the youngest and supposedly least experienced human, behaved in ways that puzzled the Kethmori warrior. During combat simulations, Murphy consistently ignored optimal tactical choices in favor of protecting simulated civilians or rescuing simulated wounded soldiers. When Zixathara pointed out that his actions had cost them several training victories, Murphy shrugged. Winning a simulation doesn't matter if people die in real life, he said. I'd rather lose every training exercise and save everyone when it actually counts. These behaviors made no sense to Zixathara, but something else was even more confusing. The humans treated their alien ally with the same consideration they showed each other. They asked for Zixathara's opinions during planning sessions. They adapted their tactics to take advantage of Kethmori's strengths. They invited the alien warrior to join them for meals, even though Zixathara's dietary requirements were very different from theirs. No species had ever done this before. Other aliens either feared the Kethmori or simply tolerated them as necessary allies. But these humans seemed genuinely interested in learning about Kethmori culture and incorporating alien perspectives into their strategies. Your people have different tactical traditions, Jake said during one planning session. What would a Kethmori commander do in this situation? Zixathara found the question unsettling. You wish to copy our methods? I wish to understand your methods, Jake corrected. Maybe we can combine the best parts of both approaches. This was unprecedented. In Zixathara's experience, each species jealously guarded its military secrets. The idea of deliberately sharing tactical knowledge with aliens was almost incomprehensible. But the most disturbing thing was how the humans responded to bad news. When reports arrived that the Void Hunter fleet was moving faster than expected, the humans did not panic or despair. Instead, they worked harder. They extended their duty shifts voluntarily. They shared resources without being ordered to do so. They supported each other through increasing stress and fear. Jake Morrison called it pulling together. Amy Rodriguez called it having each other's backs. Pete Collins called it being a team. Lisa Chen called it doing what needs to be done. Ryan Murphy called it looking out for each other. Zixathara called it impossible. On the 21st day, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Long-range sensors had detected the Void Hunter advance scouts. The real war was about to begin, and Zixathara would finally see whether these strange human behaviors had any value in actual combat. The alien warrior suspected that human compassion and cooperation would prove to be fatal weaknesses when faced with an enemy that knew no mercy. But as Zixathara watched the humans preparing for battle, something cold and sharp settled in the Kethmori's stomach. For the first time since arriving at Station Alpha, Zixathara began to wonder if there was something about humans that other species understood, but the Kethmori did not. The transport ships dropped them on Colony 7 just as the first Void Hunter scouts emerged from hyperspace. What should have been a simple evacuation mission became a desperate fight for survival when the enemy arrived 6 hours ahead of schedule. Zixathara crouched behind a concrete barrier and watched the humans deploy into combat positions, finally getting the chance to see how these strange creatures actually fought. The colony sprawled across the surface of Titan Delta, a mining settlement, with 30,000 civilians and minimal defenses. Evacuation ships waited on landing pads throughout the settlement, but they needed time to load refugees and escape to hyperspace. The human Kethmori task force had been sent to buy that time, but now they faced Void Hunter forces that outnumbered them 10-1. Zixthara's first glimpse of actual Void Hunters sent ice through the alien warrior's veins. The creatures looked like walking nightmares, black, writhing masses of tentacles and teeth that moved with horrible purpose. They absorbed energy weapons and seemed to grow stronger when damaged. Worst of all, they could take the shape of their victims, wearing the faces of the dead to spread terror and confusion. "Contact front," Pete Collins reported over the communication system. "Multiple hostiles moving through sectors 7 and 8. His voice was calm and professional, showing no trace of the fear that Zixathara felt creeping up their own spine. "Jake," Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "All units, remember the mission. We hold until the civilians are clear. No one gets left behind." Zixthara expected the humans to establish defensive positions and fight conservatively, trying to minimize their own casualties while delaying the enemy advance. Instead, they did something that defied all military logic. When Ryan Murphy's position was overrun by a swarm of Void Hunters, Pete Collins abandoned his own defensive post and charged directly into the enemy formation. The Kethmori warrior watched in amazement as Pete fought his way through creatures that should have killed him instantly. He used explosives with reckless precision, destroying Void Hunters while somehow avoiding harming the young soldier trapped in their midst. When Pete reached Ryan, he threw the younger man over his shoulder and fought his way back out, taking wounds that would have killed most species. "Why did you do that?" Zixthara demanded when Pete collapsed behind cover, bleeding from multiple cuts. Murphy's position was lost. Tactical doctrine says to abandon it and reinforce elsewhere. Pete looked at the alien warrior with something between pity and disgust. "We don't leave people behind," he said, wrapping bandages around his arm. "Ever. That's not how we do things." The phrase echoed what Jake Morrison had said during their first meeting, but now Zixathara began to understand that this was not just empty words. The humans actually meant it. They would risk everything to save a single person, even when logic said that person was already lost. Lisa Chen demonstrated the same impossible behavior when Void Hunters broke through the defensive perimeter and threatened the main evacuation site. The tech specialist took position at a narrow choke point and held it alone for 17 minutes, giving civilian transports time to launch. She had enough ammunition for maybe 5 minutes of sustained fire, but she made every shot count, using improvised explosives and environmental hazards to multiply her effectiveness. Zixathara watched through a scope as Lisa fought off wave after wave of Void Hunters. The small human should have been overwhelmed in the first 30 seconds, but she kept moving, kept shooting, kept finding ways to stay alive just a few seconds longer. When her ammunition ran out, she used a broken piece of rebar as a spear. When that broke, she used her bare hands and explosive charges strapped to her own body. "Chen, fall back," Jake Morrison ordered over the radio. "You've done enough." "Negative, sir," Lisa replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Transport 7 is still loading. They need another 2 minutes." She held for those 2 minutes, and 3 more besides, until the last civilian ship cleared the atmosphere. Only then did she retreat, moving like a ghost through the abandoned buildings while Void Hunters swarmed the position she had held. Amy Rodriguez was no less incredible. To watch. The medic moved through the battlefield like she was taking a casual walk, treating wounded soldiers while energy bolts and tentacles whipped through the air around her. She saved lives under conditions that should have made medical care impossible, working with tools that should have been inadequate for the injury she faced. But it was Jake Morrison who truly showed Zixathara what humans were capable of when everything was at stake. The captain coordinated the entire defense while tracking the status of every person under his command. He knew where each soldier was positioned, how much ammunition they had left, and whether they were injured or afraid or angry. He moved resources and personnel like a master artist, creating opportunities for his people to succeed even when success seemed impossible. When Amy Rodriguez volunteered for a suicide mission to destroy a Void Hunter communication node, Jake did not just approve the mission. He took it upon himself, leading a small team into the heart of enemy territory, while the rest of the force provided cover. Zixathara watched the captain and his team disappear into a maze of tunnels filled with Void Hunters. Logic said they would never return. Logic said the mission would fail and the entire defensive effort would collapse. But logic had been wrong about humans before. 23 minutes later, explosions lit up the underground complex. The Void Hunter communication network went down, throwing their forces into chaos. Jake Morrison and his team emerged from the tunnels battered and bleeding but alive, carrying intelligence that would prove crucial in future battles. The fighting continued for 8 hours. When it finally ended, Colony 7 was evacuated, and the Void Hunter advance was broken. 90% of the civilian population escaped to safety, along with most of the defending forces. By any reasonable measure, it was an impossible victory, achieved through tactics that should never have worked. Zixathara sat among the survivors and tried to understand what had happened. The humans had not fought like any species the Kethmori warrior had ever encountered. They did not fight to win in the traditional sense. They fought as if the universe itself depended on their success. They fought as if failure was not just unacceptable, but literally unthinkable. Most importantly, they fought for each other. Every decision, every risk, every sacrifice was made with the knowledge that other humans were counting on them. They were not just soldiers following orders. They were people protecting everything they cared about. For the first time since arriving at Station Alpha, Zixathara began to understand why other species spoke of humans in whispered, fearful tones. It was not because humans were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most advanced. It was because they were the most determined. When humans decided that something mattered, they would move mountains to protect it, and apparently, everything mattered to humans. Firebase Omega became their new home after the evacuation of Colony 7, a fortified position built into an asteroid field where the combined human Kethmori forces could regroup and plan their next moves. But the Void Hunters were learning, adapting, becoming something worse than the creatures Zixathara had fought before. The alien warrior watched the humans deal with an enemy that grew more terrifying with each encounter and began to understand something about fear that changed everything. The first sign that things were different came when Pete Collins returned from a scouting mission, his face pale and his hands shaking. "They're using our people," he reported to Jake Morrison. "The Void Hunters. They're wearing the faces of the dead from Colony 7. Zixathara felt their scales prickle with unease. The Void Hunter ability to mimic their victims was known throughout the galaxy, but seeing it affect the humans was different. These creatures were not just copying random civilians. They were specifically targeting the soldiers who had fought at Colony 7, using the faces of people the humans had failed to save. Amy Rodriguez was the first to encounter one of these mimics during a patrol of the outer perimeter. She returned to base 20 minutes later, her medical supplies scattered and her uniform torn. Jake Morrison found her sitting in the supply closet, staring at her hands. "It looked exactly like Jenny Walsh," Amy whispered. "The little girl from the evacuation center." The one who didn't make it to the transport ship. It spoke in her voice, called me by name, asked why I didn't save her. Zixathera watched Jake Morrison kneel beside the shaken medic. Any reasonable commander would have ordered psychological evaluation and temporary removal from duty. Instead, Jake simply sat with Amy until she stopped shaking, then helped her reorganize her supplies. It wasn't Jenny, he said quietly. Jenny died quickly. She didn't suffer. You did everything you could? Did I? Amy asked. I keep thinking about the choices I made. Maybe if I had moved faster, prioritized differently, been better at my job. You saved 43 people that day, Jake replied. I counted them myself. 43 human beings are alive because of decisions you made under impossible circumstances. Amy reported for duty the next morning, but Zixathara could see the toll it had taken. Her hands moved differently when she worked, always checking and double-checking her medical instruments. She talked to herself while treating patients, whispering reassurances that seemed meant for someone else. Pete Collins faced his own nightmare 3 days later when a void hunter wearing the face of his childhood friend Alex tried to infiltrate the base. Pete had killed the mimic himself, but afterward he developed a nervous tic that made his left eye twitch whenever he thought no one was looking. He still led night raids against void hunter positions, but now he checked every shadow twice and jumped at unexpected sounds. Lisa Chen suffered the worst psychological attack when void hunters began broadcasting on human communication frequencies, using voices of the dead to spread terror and confusion. One of the voices belonged to Lisa's sister, who had died in the mining accident years before Jake Morrison learned about it from personnel files. Lisa, why didn't you save me? The voice whispered through the communications system during the night watch. You were always so smart, so good with machines. Why couldn't you fix the equipment that failed? Why did you let me die alone in the dark? Zixathara found Lisa in the engineering section afterward, working frantically on weapons modifications that served no apparent purpose. Her movements were jerky and desperate, like she was trying to outrun something that lived inside her own mind. The voice was not real, Zixathara told her. The Void Hunters created it from intercepted communications and data files. I know that, Lisa replied without looking up from her work, but it sounded exactly like her. Every word was something she might have said. Yet despite these psychological wounds, all 3 humans continued to function. They reported for duty each morning, followed orders, and performed their jobs with the same dedication they had shown before. Zixathara could not understand how they managed it. Among the Kethmori, warriors who suffered such mental trauma were either treated until they recovered completely or removed from service permanently. There was no middle ground between full effectiveness and total incapacity, but these humans seemed to operate in a strange space between those extremes, functioning despite their pain rather than waiting for it to heal. Jake Morrison was facing his own demons, though he tried to hide them from his team. The captain had begun working 20-hour days, reviewing battle reports and casualty lists with obsessive attention to detail. He memorized the name of every person who had died under his command, along with details about their families and their final moments. Zixathara found him in the command center one night, staring at holographic displays showing the locations of every known Void Hunter force. You do not sleep enough, the alien warrior observed. Sleep is a luxury we can't afford right now, Jake replied without taking his eyes off the displays. Every hour we waste, more people die. You cannot save everyone, Zixathara pointed out. It is impossible. Jake Morrison turned to look at the Kethmori warrior, and for the first time, Zixathara saw something in human eyes that was familiar. It was the same expression Zixathara had seen in mirrors after particularly difficult battles, the look of someone who had been forced to make choices that would haunt them forever. Maybe not, Jake said, but I have to try. That's what makes us human. As the weeks passed, Zixthara began to understand something profound about these creatures. The humans were not fearless, as the alien warrior had initially assumed. They were the opposite of fearless. They were afraid of everything. Every terrible possibility, every potential loss, every horrific outcome played out in their minds in vivid detail. Amy Rodriguez was afraid of failing to save someone who could be saved. Pete Collins was afraid of losing another friend to violence. Lisa Chen was afraid that her skills would not be enough when they were needed most. Jake Morrison was afraid that his decisions would get good people killed, but instead of being paralyzed by these fears, the humans used them as fuel. Their terror made them careful, made them thorough, made them fight harder for the things they were trying to protect. They did not overcome their fear. They embraced it, channeled it, and turned it into something that made them stronger. It was during this period that Jake Morrison made the decision that would haunt Zixthara for years to come, as Void Hunter forces massed for a final assault. On Firebase Omega, the captain called his senior staff together for a special briefing. "If the base is overrun," he said quietly, "we'll detonate the fusion reactors. The explosion should take out most of their fleet and give the evacuation ships time to reach the core worlds." The room fell silent. Even Zixthara, who was accustomed to brutal military pragmatism, felt shocked by the proposal. "You are planning a suicide mission," the alien warrior said. "I'm planning a last resort," Jake corrected. "If we can't hold the line, we make sure our deaths count for something." Amy Rodriguez, Pete Collins, and Lisa Chen exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they nodded their agreement. Not because they wanted to die, but because they understood that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to sacrifice everything for it. Zixthara realized that human fear was not a weakness to be overcome. It was a weapon to be wielded by those brave enough to face it directly. The final assault on Firebase Omega began with a darkness that seemed to swallow the stars themselves. Void Hunter hive ships emerged from hyperspace like diseased tumors growing out of nothing, their black hulls pulsing with alien energies that made Zixthara's scales itch with remembered terror. The alien warrior crouched in the command bunker and watched the tactical displays light up with enemy contacts. There were too many to count, too many to fight, too many to survive. But halfway through the battle, something happened that changed everything Zixthara thought they knew about humans. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the command room, surrounded by reports of overwhelming enemy forces and failing defensive positions, and gave an order that made the Keth Mori warriors' blood run cold. "All units, this is Morrison," the captain said into his communication device, his voice steady and calm. "Weapons free, no prisoners, no mercy. Protect the evacuation ships at all costs." The words themselves were not unusual. Zixthara had heard similar orders countless times during their military career. But something in Jake Morrison's tone was different, something that spoke of boundaries being crossed and restraints being removed. The humans were about to show what they were truly capable of when all their self-imposed limitations were stripped away. Amy Rodriguez was the first to demonstrate this transformation. The medic who had risked her life to save enemy wounded during previous battles became something else entirely. She moved through the station's corridors like a predator hunting prey. Her medical training turned toward causing harm instead of preventing it. She knew exactly where to place shots to disable Void Hunters most efficiently, exactly how to use their own biology against them. Zixthara watched through security monitors as Amy set traps using medical supplies, creating explosive devices that looked like aid stations but detonated when Void Hunters approached. She had memorized the anatomy of every species in the sector, and now she used that knowledge to kill with surgical precision. Pete Collins became something even more terrifying. The weapons expert who had taught young soldiers with infinite patience now moved through enemy formations like death incarnate. His explosives were no longer tools for defensive positions. They became instruments of pure destruction, designed to maximize casualties and spread terror among the attacking forces. The HFY warrior watched Pete coordinate a symphony of devastation that turned 3 decks of the station into a killing field. He used shaped charges to collapse corridors at precisely calculated moments, trapping Void Hunter forces in confined spaces where they could be eliminated methodically. His understanding of structural engineering became a weapon that turned the station itself into an ally. Lisa Chen stopped building defensive modifications and started creating instruments of pure extermination. Her workshop became a factory for devices that served no purpose except killing as many enemies as possible in the shortest amount of time. She built weapons that would have made the most bloodthirsty HFY warrior pause and reconsider their career choices. But it was Jake Morrison who truly demonstrated what humans could become when they stopped trying to be civilized. The captain coordinated these brutal tactics with the same care and precision he had once used to protect civilians. He orchestrated a campaign of destruction that systematically eliminated Void Hunter forces while ensuring that every evacuation ship escaped. Unharmed, Zixathera realized that the humans had been holding back this entire time. All their compassion, all their concern for enemy casualties, all their adherence to rules of engagement, these were not signs of weakness. They were self-imposed limitations designed to prevent the humans from becoming something that even their allies would fear. The turning point came when Jake Morrison identified the location of the Void Hunter command ship. Instead of calling for a surgical strike or attempting to disable it, he simply marked it for complete annihilation. Amy Rodriguez led a boarding party that eliminated the crew with methodical efficiency. Pete Collins planted explosives that turned the ship into a beacon of destruction visible from 3 star systems away. Lisa Chen hacked their communication network and used it to spread false orders that sent enemy forces into carefully prepared ambushes. The Void Hunters, creatures that had consumed entire civilizations without showing fear, began to retreat. For the first time in their recorded history, they fled from an enemy rather than trying to absorb and convert it. They had encountered something worse than themselves, something that understood destruction on a level they could not match. Ryan Murphy, the youngest member of the team, demonstrated perhaps the most chilling transformation of all. The soldier who had consistently ignored tactical advantages to protect simulated civilians became a ghost that haunted the station's ventilation systems. He moved through the infrastructure like a living weapon, appearing behind enemy lines, to eliminate key targets before disappearing again. Zixathera watched the young human coordinate attacks that showed an understanding of psychological warfare that went beyond anything taught in military academies. Ryan did not just kill enemy commanders, he eliminated them in ways that spread maximum terror among their followers, using their own fears and biological imperatives against them. The battle lasted 18 hours, but the outcome was decided in the first 6. The Void Hunter forces that had seemed unstoppable were systematically dismantled by humans who had transformed themselves into something that defied classification. They were no longer soldiers following rules of engagement. They were forces of nature unleashed with a specific purpose. When the fighting finally ended, Firebase Omega was secure, and the Void Hunter fleet was destroyed. But Zixathera looked at the humans in the aftermath and felt something close to terror. These creatures who had been so concerned with protecting life, so careful about minimizing casualties, so dedicated to helping others, they had become something that made the most vicious predators in the galaxy look gentle by comparison. The most frightening part was how easily they had made the transition. They had not struggled with their decision to become killers. They had not hesitated or shown doubt about their methods. They had simply flipped a switch in their minds and become something else entirely, as if the capacity for this level of destruction had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. Jake Morrison stood in the ruins of the command center, surrounded by tactical displays showing the complete elimination of enemy forces, and calmly began issuing orders for damage assessment and casualty reports. His voice was the same, his mannerisms unchanged, but Zixthara could see something different in his eyes. The captain had looked into the abyss of what humans could become, and he had not flinched. The Kethmori warrior realized that humans were not just dangerous because of their technology or their tactics or their determination. They were dangerous because they understood exactly how to be monsters, and they chose when to embrace that understanding. They had shown mercy and compassion not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to control their own capacity for destruction. And when they decided that mercy and compassion were luxuries they could not afford, they became something that even the darkest corners of the galaxy had never imagined. The silence after the battle was more unsettling than the fighting had been. Firebase Omega drifted through space like a wounded animal, its hull scarred by weapons fire, and its corridors stained with the remains of creatures that no longer existed. The Void Hunter fleet was scattered across 3 star systems, their hive ships reduced to glowing debris that would burn in local stars for decades to come. The immediate threat was over, but Zixthara watched the humans in the aftermath and felt something that shook the alien warrior to their very core. Jake Morrison sat alone in what remained of the command center, staring at casualty reports displayed on a cracked monitor. The captain who had orchestrated the complete destruction of an enemy fleet was quietly weeping for every name on the list. His shoulders shook with grief for soldiers who had died under his command, civilians who had been lost before the evacuation, even enemy combatants who might have been saved under different circumstances. Zixthara found this reaction incomprehensible. Among the Kethmori, successful commanders were celebrated for their victories, not mourned for their necessary losses. "You have achieved a great triumph," the alien warrior said. "The Void Hunters are defeated. Your people are safe." Jake looked up with eyes that were red from exhaustion and grief. 47 people died to make that happen, he said. 47 people who had families, dreams, people who loved them. How is that a triumph? "Because thousands more will live," Zixthara replied, using the logic that had guided Kethmori military thinking for centuries. "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." "The needs of everyone matter," Jake said, repeating the phrase Lisa Chen had used during their first briefing. "Every life has value. Every death is a failure, even when it's necessary, Amy." Rodriguez had returned to the medical bay, but she was not treating combat injuries. Instead, she worked on wounded prisoners, Void Hunter organisms that had been captured during the final battle. The same creatures she had killed with surgical precision just hours before were now receiving the best medical care she could provide. Zixthara watched the medic work and felt confusion ripple through their thoughts. "These are enemy combatants," the alien warrior pointed out. "They would have killed you without hesitation." Amy did not look up from her patient, a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth that flinched away from her touch. "They're wounded," she said simply. "Everything else is just details." Her hands shook slightly as she worked, betraying the psychological cost of what she had been forced to do during the battle. But she continued treating enemies with the same care she showed allies, because that was who she chose to be when the killing was over. Pete Collins had returned to the training areas, but now his lessons included information that had not been part of the curriculum before. He taught young soldiers about the psychological cost of warfare, about the importance of having someone to talk to after combat, about the warning signs of trauma that could destroy a person's mind as surely as any weapon. "What we did here was necessary," he told a group of recruits who had not been part of the final battle. "But it was also terrible. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember that choosing to become a monster, even temporarily, has consequences. Make sure you have people around you who can help you find your way back." His left eye still twitched when he thought no one was looking, but Pete had learned to live with the memory of what he had become. He shared his knowledge freely, not because he was proud of it, but because he understood that others might face the same choices someday. Lisa Chen had locked away most of the weapons she had created during the final battle. Her workshop was back to its normal state, filled with defensive modifications and equipment improvements designed to save lives rather than take them. But Zixathara had seen the sealed storage lockers where the more terrible devices were kept, waiting like sleeping nightmares that might be needed again. "Why do you hide these weapons?" Zixathara asked. "They were effective against the Void Hunters." Lisa looked at the storage lockers with something that might have been fear. "Because they're too effective," she said. "Because once you start building things whose only purpose is to kill, it becomes easier to keep building them. Because I never want to become someone who thinks of destruction as the first solution instead of the last resort." Ryan Murphy had returned to his usual duties, but he moved differently now. The young soldier who had been eager to prove himself was quieter, more thoughtful, more aware of the weight of the choices he had made. He still volunteered for dangerous missions, but now he understood the full cost of violence in ways that no training simulation could have taught him. The most unsettling thing was how quickly the humans had returned to their previous behavior patterns. They had voluntarily put their self-imposed limitations back in place, choosing to be compassionate and caring instead of remaining the terrifying killing machines they had briefly become. They restrained themselves not because they had forgotten how to be monsters, but because they remembered exactly how easy it was. Zixathara spent days trying to understand this transformation before finally composing a report to the Keth Mori High Command. The document was unlike anything the alien warrior had ever written, filled with observations that challenged everything the Keth Mori thought they knew about warfare and civilization. Recommendation: formal alliance with humanity. Zixathara wrote. Warning: never give them a reason to remove their limitations. The galaxy has produced many predators, many warriors, many killers. But humanity is the only species that chooses when to be monstrous and chooses when to stop. The report continued with detailed analysis of human combat capabilities, psychological profiles, and tactical recommendations. But the most important section was the conclusion. Previous assessment of human weakness was incorrect. Their compassion is not a limitation of their effectiveness. It is a demonstration of their strength. Any species capable of such destruction that voluntarily restrains itself is not weak. It is the most dangerous force in the known universe. 3 weeks after the battle, Zixathara submitted a formal request for permanent assignment to human space. The request was approved, though the Keth Mori High Command seemed puzzled by their warriors' desire to remain among aliens rather than returning to serve with their own kind. Zixathara could not explain that being afraid of humans was the first step toward respecting them. In a galaxy full of threats, there was no safer place to be than beside the species that frightened even their own nightmares. The humans had taught the alien warrior something that would change the Keth Mori understanding of warfare forever. True strength was not the ability to destroy everything around you. True strength was the ability to choose not to. 6 months later, a new alien species made contact with the human Keth Mori Alliance, requesting assistance against an unknown threat in their home system. Jake Morrison accepted the mission immediately, then quietly began reviewing personnel files and memorizing names. The cycle was beginning again, and Zixathara realized that this was what made humans truly terrifying. They never stopped caring enough to fight for others, no matter what it cost them personally. The alien warrior's final log entry became part of Keth Mori military archives. I came here to learn human tactics. Instead, I learned what it means to have something worth fighting for. The humans call this hope. I call it the most dangerous weapon in the universe.